Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the next session of For Climate. Today, we will be talking about our challenges in the dirty places. So ML's huge impact on the recycling industry. The discussion today will be led by Areeb Malik, who is a seasoned ML practitioner and an ex-software engineer at Facebook. He set out to co-found the company called Glacier in 2019 with the intention to make a serious and an immediate effect on the society's fight against climate change. He's driven to overhaul this recycling industry and is excited to grow Glacier's impact on the world by helping reduce the recyclables that go into landfills and the ocean. With that said, Areeb, over to you. Please take the stage.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction. Let me just pop my slides up real quick so we can dive into things. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is a big event. There's a lot of cool things happening, and so I appreciate everyone sticking around and giving me 30 minutes of their time to learn more about recycling, which is typically a space that most people don't care about. I think in society, we're taught to think that you just put your stuff in the bin, take it out to the curb, and then magic happens. But of course, it is it's nastier than that. And I am here to take you on a little tour of recycling, its problems, and what AI can do to really make it better. So I'm going to start with a quiz. Of course, you're all on mute, so I'll just walk you through it. But this is a picture of a semi-truck dumping a load of garbage into a landfill. My question is, what is the dollar amount of stuff being lost here today? And to help you get to the bottom of that, here's some stats. This truck has about 20 tons of waste inside of it. And as a truck, you're not actually allowed to dump into a landfill for free. You actually have to pay to do that. This landfill charges $50 per ton. So again, my question is, how much money are we throwing away here? And if you're thinking, Areeb, that's real easy math. That's 50 times 20, it's $1,000. You are wrong because it's a trick question. Yes, there is a $1,000 tipping fee, but maybe the more astounding bit behind this is that in that truckload of garbage, there's actually $6,000 worth of recyclables. That is plastics and metals and papers that we could have turned into the raw materials to produce new stuff valued at about $6,000 across commodities. And that happens all the time. Every day around the planet, we're dumping tons of stuff that is useful for our production habits into landfills. And the impact here is pretty gnarly. If you zoom out to like the global impact, we throw away $100 billion plus of recyclables every year because we really just don't have a good system to collect them. Beyond the economics, there's a big CO2 impact. Every time that you don't recycle a aluminum can or a plastic bottle or whatever, there's actually a CO2 emissions impact related to that. This happens because as a manufacturer, say of aluminum cans, you have a choice of producing that new aluminum can from an old one, a recycled one, versus the virgin material like bauxite. Or when you go the recycled route, it uses 97% less energy than if you go the virgin route. And when you add all of that up, we're emitting over 500 million tons of CO2 annually because of this bad recycling. And what this bad recycling really looks like is a number some of you may have seen before, but here in the US, at least, we recover only 6% of the plastic we consume. It's an abysmal rate. I definitely thought it was higher when I first got involved in this space. I was hoping it'd be higher, but it turns out we just do a really bad job of it. And this is a big problem. This is the problem that we over here at Glacier are working to solve. Just a quick bit about our company. We make two products, and I'll talk you through both of them kind of in more detail. The first is a robot powered by AI that lives inside of our recycling centers and helps them produce higher quality stuff. We basically sort and pick out recyclables from streams of waste or other recyclables. We also produce AI-powered analytics that help these facilities, as well as other players in the space, better understand what is happening in the circular economy. But more about us, I want to tell you guys more about recycling and why. Why is it 6%? How is it that we are so freaking bad at recycling? This is a really hard question to answer, but as I declare an expert in recycling, I will take a stab at answering it and breaking it into two big buckets of reason. Number one it is really hard for the back end of our society to produce high quality recycled feedstock. You want to create, for instance, a big bale of just PET, that's plastic number one, bottles, right? But creating that bale is really difficult when we're all just putting whatever we want into the recycling bin, picking it out, cleaning it up. That's actually really difficult to do, and therefore it's really hard to produce something manufacturers want. Secondly, it's really hard to know what is even recyclable. This is a problem that most of you on the call are probably familiar with, where you're standing in your hand with some, takeout container, and you're like, I don't know if this thing is actually recyclable. And the trick is that it's like super hard, even for someone like me who's been in the space for 5 years, to really understand, because it depends on what the material is. It depends on what city you're in. It depends, frankly, on the time of year. And all of that makes it really difficult to know, not only for the consumers, but for brands who are producing and they want to be sustainable, but they don't know how. For manufacturers who want to figure out what actually should be produced, what material should go into their stuff. All of this is problematic because there's no knowing what's going on. And I want to tell you a little bit about recycling so you have a better sense of like what is actually happening behind the scenes. Because for, again, a lot of you, you take your bottle and your cans and your cardboard, you put it in a bin, put it on the curb, and then it vanishes, right? But there is a lot going on behind the scenes. It's really fascinating. And I think as I kind of walk through it, you'll start to understand why this thing is just so freaking hard to get right. So I'll start with the brands, and I'll pick on Pepsi in this instance, just as an example. Pepsi, takes a PET bottle, fills it with Pepsi, puts a label on it, and voila, shows up on a supermarket shelf that you might go buy, drink, and then if you're a good, citizen of our circular economy, will put into your recycling bin. When you put it out on the curb, a truck will come, take it over to a facility that we call a MRF, a materials recovery facility. That MRF's job is basically to sort apart everything we put in there. We put whatever we want into the recycling bin. They need to produce a singular commodity bale, so a bale of just cardboard or just aluminum or just PET bottles. That sorting challenge is very difficult. That's where our robots play in. But once those bales are created, they send them over to what is known as a reclaimer. The reclaimer takes, for instance, that bale of PET bottles, breaks it down, cleans up a little bit more, shreds it into what we call plastic flake, and sells that plastic flake to a manufacturer. Manufacturers, what I mentioned earlier, they have this choice of, can I use recycled commodity feedstock to make my new stuff? And if they do, then they take that plastic flake, they turn in new products, sell it off to a brand for them to put their Pepsi back into. And this is ideally how the circular economy works. But hopefully, as you were listening to me tell that story, you could see all of these reasons it might not work. You might not actually have the consumer put it into their recycling bin in the first place. Now it's lost. Or you might have their recycling facility, the MRF, be unable to actually sort properly. All of these challenges exist. And it gets worse than that, because over all of this lives the government, who is trying to regulate and enforce this industry towards circularity. And all of these players trying to work together towards one goal, when there's this many people involved, you can guarantee it's going to be tough to do. And if we zip back to the fundamental question, why isn't it working? And we look at these two problems, and we look at all the players who are trying to make this work. There's one big thing I haven't mentioned yet that really spearheads why this stuff is so hard to do. And that is that there is no good data. Let me walk you through some examples of what this actually means. And I'll walk through those 6 players we just talked about. Brands. Through Pepsi, you want to be more sustainable. You want your stuff to stop taking petroleum and being a petroleum user. You want to stop having your stuff end up in landfill. In order to do that, you need to know, where is all my stuff even ending up in the first place? And how can I actually hit my ESG goals if I don't have metrics to track them? If you're a consumer like you and I, you want to know if this thing is even recyclable. And if I'm shopping, how do I weed out those fake recyclable products, those ones that have the triangle on them, but actually are not recyclable? If you're a recycling facility, how am I performing? How do I know what my trucks are giving me? Are they giving me good recyclables, or are the trucks dumping just a bunch of garbage on my floor that I can't make any product out of? And finally, if I'm a MRF, I want to know how to make my operations better. But again, I'm really blind to what's happening, how much PET is flowing through my facility, how much cardboard, what the quality of that cardboard is. All of this stuff is missing information. If you're a reclaimer, you want to know the purity of the recyclables you're buying from those MRFs, and you want to know how do you increase the quality that you're outputting. If you're a manufacturer, you want to know what the quality of the feedstock you're buying from that reclaimer is. You want to know which reclaimer I can even buy from that has the best supply. And finally, if you're the government, you're the big player in this, you want to improve recycling, but you don't even know what your recycling rate is. You don't even know how to invest your taxes to improve things. And finally, you want to know who are the problem actors, who are the bad products that are causing harm. There are all of these players who want to know what is going on and how do I improve my circularity, but I can't do it today because data is missing. I mean, if you ask yourself why is data missing, this seems like there's a lot of value. It turns out that the value is great, but the cost required is too high. I'll zoom into a MRF to give you an example of this. If you imagine a truck dumping a bunch of stuff onto the floor of a MRF, where a MRF is going to then process it. If you want to know what that composition looks like, what percent of that was plastic versus cardboard versus garbage, in order to do that, you need to take a couple of people over to what that truck dumped down and manually count things, get a sample. As you can imagine, that takes a long time, pretty inaccurate. If you want to know your outbound contamination, same thing. Get people to break down a bale and start counting things. Again, very expensive, takes a lot of people hours, and as a result is done very infrequently. So yeah, really bad data to build off of. I'm going to quantify this, make it a little more mathematical for you. The inherent problem here is that the data, which is our products, right? Our bottles, our cans, our cardboard, that stuff is inherently non-digital. It is physical, you can hold it in your hand. We need data to be digital in order to do something with it. And that process of converting that physical product to digital relies today on humans, human eyes, human hands to do the counting. And as you know, whenever humans get involved, things get expensive. And this, in this case, the cost is just so prohibitively expensive, nobody can afford to do it. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, yes, but AI can fix this. Well, yes, in fact, it can. We at Glacier are focusing on this core problem of converting the physical product, the bottle, into a digital bit that says this thing existed in our circular economy. And then by building that data, we can actually start to solve a lot of problems. But to get to the whole kind of crux of what we're doing on this call, I want to talk about the challenge, right? This is what it looks like in the real world. This is what a still grab from a dirty MRF looks like. A dirty MRF, great name, is a facility that actually processes what we send to landfill. So we might put everything into the black bin. Truck would take it over to a dirty MRF, and they will actually try to pick recyclables out of that stream. This is why you can see weird things in this stream, like there's like an apple and like a shoe, but you can also see a ton of plastic bottles and other recoverable materials. Our challenge from an AI perspective is to turn this image into this. We want to be able to segment and identify everything that is of value inside this image. And this is actually surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, difficult. And I want to talk you through, how do you actually do this? So for starters, pretty straightforward. You take an off-the-shelf CNN. There's a ton of great ones out there. You take a bunch of data, you combine them, and you get something like what you have on the right here, a model that can take an image and start to identify things inside of it. However, this will only get you so far because it turns out that this problem is quite a bit more challenging than just applying data to off-the-shelf systems. And I'll walk you through some of the problems, but first I want to tell you about what gets us off to a really good start. So, I mean, AI is developing every day, things that are great about this problem. Number one, we have controllable lighting, right? You don't have to worry about it being daytime or nighttime. You can just shine lights on a thing and get really consistent imagery throughout the day. The distance of the items is fixed. Every single time you take a picture, it's not like your camera is moving up or down. The belt and the camera are the same distance apart. There's also a ton of data to collect, so it's really easy to start building, at least collecting data on which to build. And as I mentioned before, the off-the-shelf CNN models we have today are really good, and they're frankly getting even better. Every week I turn a corner and there's a new development we can actually build on top of. And so there's a lot of good stuff to build on top of, but like I said, this base of kind of easy doesn't get you quite far enough, and there's a lot of challenges. I'll walk you through a couple of them. One that's really intriguing is the diversity within a commodity or within a class. This is 8 pictures of PET bottles, but you can see none of them really look the same. And that's a number of reasons behind that. One is going to be just like the branding, right? You get different sizes, different labels on each of them. Number 2 is going to be what they're surrounded by, what they're covered by. Number 3 is going to be how destroyed they got on the way from, the supermarket shelf to your house, where you maybe crumple it up and put it away, to the truck, to the facility as it got ground up and passed through a bunch of other machinery. Then it shows up here. Even just a single, water bottle from a single brand is going to show up in 100,000 different ways as it passes underneath our camera. And that diversity is really hard to model for because you need data that actually represents that diversity. Collecting that data and identifying where your data is actually weak, there's a lot of challenges involved in actually making that work. And so that's one of the big challenges we have to deal with as we start to model this out. PET bottles are great because there's so many of them, but with more obscure commodities like a can of beans, it starts to get a little bit more complex. Secondly, things look a lot alike. I have two boxes drawn here on a screen that's supposed to be mostly paper, sorry. And these two boxes, one of them is actually plastic film, so like a plastic bag you might buy groceries in, and the other is tissue paper, which is just kind of flimsy paper. And if you're looking at this like I'm looking at it, it's actually very, very hard to distinguish which one is which. And this is a big problem, right? Because you need to actually be able to distinguish these things, but visually it's really hard to do. And so you have to solve that challenge as well. If you did take a guess, this is the right answer. So congrats to those of you who guessed correctly. On top of all of this, those distinctions that are hard to tell, they live in the details. And CMNs today are not great at finding these details. So this top bottle looks very much like the bottom bottle. The top bottle is actually clear PET, which means that you can actually see through it if you were to take that label off, that Starbucks label. And we know this because of two things. One is near the neck, you can actually see a little bit of clear. And number two is that little Starbucks logo. We can actually associate that logo with the type of bottle it is. But for models, what they do is they look at a whole image, right? And they can identify major features, but identifying these small features and being able to differentiate classes based on the small features, models do struggle with that. So we need to tweak how our models think so that they can identify these small things. The bottom bottle, very similar looking, is actually white PET. And we know that because of that Fairlife branding. Again, a very small feature that the human eye can pick up on, but models are not designed to think about. And so how do you solve that? That's another challenge that we layer on. I'll stop with the challenge in a second, but two more just for fun. Obfuscation, right? You have things piled on top of each other. How do you actually see and identify like things that are really buried underneath? You can tell that there is a plastic bottle underneath there, but teaching a model to find that becomes very difficult. And we need to be able to do that. And then finally, we don't do counts in this industry. We do weights, right? We need to know how much stuff weighed. Models, of course, draw boxes or segment and count pixels, but knowing the actual weight of an item is actually a little bit more tricky than that, because you need to be able to include things like the height or the depth map of the thing to actually figure out what the volume of the item is. That becomes difficult as well. There's a whole bunch of challenges in this space, and it's daunting, but it's really important. And the cool part is like we're making pretty good ground on it as well. I figured I'd share with you guys a couple of techniques we've been using, just so you can get a sense of how we're applying modern AI techniques to actually solving this problem. And I'll keep it brief, but in short, here's a couple of cool ones. One that I think has worked particularly well for us is this problem of identifying small features. And a cool way to do that is slicing. You can slice an image into smaller images and run both training and inference on those segments to be able to have the model actually identify those small features that really do matter. This is great because you can run it after the labeling is collected, but it is, of course, power hungry, right? It takes, in this case, we cut it into 6x the GPU compute to actually do the inference, and that becomes problematic. But it has a trade-off of being able to identify these small things, being able to figure out how to kind of balance those two is one of the cool challenges we get to toy around with. Synthetic data, also very helpful. I'm sure a lot of you have played around with this. It has its pros, it has its cons, right? Synthetic data, of course, models tend to pick up on the syntheticness of what you put on there. They'll notice, hey, like this thing looks pasted onto this image, and they'll collect like, training on those features, which you don't actually want. You want it to say that's an item that should be there, but models tend to struggle with that. So figuring out how to use synthetic data is really important in this space because there are things you don't see very often. Here we have a picture of toothpaste tubes. Toothpaste tubes do not show up very often in the recycling stream. And if you can imagine, 300 pictures, kind of like the ones we've seen, about 1 in 300 of them will have a toothpaste tube. How do you build a model that can identify toothpaste tubes when they're so infrequent without biasing the data? That's a big challenge, and synthetic data has the potential to really help us there, but it's also very difficult to get right. For those of you who've played with synthetics before, you probably know what I'm talking about. The last thing I'll share, because I think it's really a great thing to be part of this community, is that the open source AI technology is just getting so much better every single day. This is a picture of Meta's SAM. If you guys don't know Meta's segment everything, it's really cool. You basically feed it a raw picture and it will do its best to just identify every single thing in it. And while this looks really cool on paper, you're like, oh, look, it's starting to draw around everything we need. If you take a closer look at the details, this is actually not doing quite good enough a job. Focus in on that Sunny D bottle at the bottom, and you'll notice that there are the lid, the top half, the handle, the label, the bottom half, and then on the label there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different kind of like segments. And so you have like, 7 to 8 segments for an individual item, which is obviously not what is actually happening here, right? But this is a really good start. If you can actually take this technology and piggyback on top of it, you can start to build models that are much stronger. That can actually do this very, very difficult job, as you can see. I could share more in the Q&A if you guys want to ask, but I'll just kind of start wrapping it up, saying, look, we already are doing this. This is an example of something we've done. We put one of these cameras into a facility, and we were able to find over 80,000 recyclable items in a given day that are being sent from this facility into landfill. And when I zoom back to that opening stat, about $100 billion worth of stuff being tossed. This is what it looks like. Being able to identify this for this facility led the facility to make adjustments that could drastically drop this number so they can recover more stuff, keep it in the circular economy. Before, on the left-hand side, that's what it used to look like. People sorting through stuff, very expensive, very slow. We can provide that same service real time, all the time at basically zero cost. And they're very excited about that. When you zoom out to all the other players, there's all sorts of people who need this information to drive circularity. Governments, brands, manufacturers, reclaimers, everybody needs this information so that they can actually make the changes they need to make to push us towards circularity. I'll wrap up with this big fact that a lot of people don't realize: 45% of our greenhouse gas emissions, 45% of them come not from our energy, but from our stuff. And there's a study from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and it's really revealing the big problem with our pollution and the way we treat our circular economy. 45% of emissions could be solved with circularity, but it's not something that a lot of us think about, and it's why we at Glacier are so excited to be working on this problem. There's a lot of challenges to be solved that can actually help push us towards circularity, and a lot of it starts with data. We want to know which products are causing the most problems. We want to know what kind of energy savings could be achieved with new legislation on the circular economy. We want to know what the impact of actually doing better recycling, opening a new plant in our town is. Or here at Glacier, we always love to focus on this last question, which is, how do we actually move towards a world where nothing we consume is wasted? I want to leave a few minutes at the end for Q&A. So if you guys have any, I am happy to take them now. And I think there's a little Q&A box I will click on. And feel free to pepper them in. Otherwise, my email's on the screen if you want to shoot me an email and connect later. So I have 2 questions that I will take for now, unless Priyanka, you want to say anything.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank you so much. It was a wonderful, discussion, and I guess so much of so many eye-opening facts came through. So thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, if you want to take the questions, go ahead, please say the question and first, and go ahead.
You got it. So question number 1 is, do you think it's possible / impactful to put energy into reuse versus recycling? Yes, absolutely. When I started this company, I wanted to find a way to get reuse to be more and more prevalent in our society. This is more of a philosophical question. I think it is a better solution. If we could get everyone in the world to reuse and never put anything into their recycling bin, that is just better. But you do have the problem of trying to convince and convert a bunch of people into a reuse economy. And I personally think that is a much harder challenge and a much harder thing to move the needle on than actually solving for a problem that doesn't require people to change their behaviors. It's a good thing, and I think there's a lot of people working on it. But I mean, I've been around the world and been around to many places in this country, even out here in California. People are just bad at recycling, and no matter how green and hippie they pretend to be, it is really tough to convince them to do better. And so, yes, I would love to do that. I personally think that there's more impact to be had by adjusting a system that already exists. We already have all of our stuff flowing through these recycling facilities, et cetera. If we can actually make them better, there's a lot of kind of impact to be had with kind of small changes. But I do think reuse is really important. That's why I don't ever buy single-use bottles or anything like that. But I can't convince 300 million Americans to do the same. That seems a little bit difficult. Question 2, are there other countries that are recycling more effectively? If so, are they using ML to support or just more human power? Great question. The 2 countries that come to mind as like being better recyclers are, well, this isn't a country, but Europe in general is a little bit better about this. And number 2 would be Japan, or a lot of East Asian countries. In Europe, it's more technology focused. So they do use AI and better machinery and better systems to turn out better recycling. In East Asia and countries like Japan, it's actually cultural. Now, if you see how like facilities in like recycling facilities in those countries look, everything's just like sparkling clean. This goes back to like the reuse thing, right? Could we convince our population here in the US or wherever to actually be better citizens? I would love to. It's a tricky thing to pull off. I think a lot of it's going to come in this country, at least from legislation. But to answer your question, yeah, like ML does exist. It's very young in this space. And so it's coming along. I think where you see better recycling, it oftentimes relates to better consumer behavior, as well as better, more money being poured in. And that's where we see kind of trending in the space. Cool. Last question, because I only got a minute left. From Henry, if your product is available for near zero cost, how does Glacier make money? Yeah, zero cost to us. Sorry, that was unclear. We can provide it pretty free, but of course, I mean, it just takes a bit of inference time. But there's a lot of people who are willing to pay for this because it helps inform business decisions. These facilities, the governments, the brands, they are willing to spend good bucks on this type of information so that they can actually make the decisions that actually help drive them towards their goals, drive up their efficiency, etc. I was just comparing zero cost, like the cost of doing it the old way, which is paying people to do it. It costs a lot more to pay a person than to run an inference on a couple images. So that is what I meant. Sorry for the lack of clarity. Cool. All right, I am through all the questions. Anyone else? You got 30 seconds. Okay. Well, in that case, I think we will wrap it up. Priyanka, thanks for having me. This was great.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to thank everyone, who's attending the session, and thank you, Areeb, for taking us through the whole process. And I hope, the machine learning models are learning, get better and better with respect to the hard challenges that you mentioned. I'm sure we're pulling it off really well with the easy